My son sold my $2.3 million home and restaurant property and handed me $45,000 cash to live comfortably in a retirement community. After 42 years of building a business from nothing, sacrificing everything for my family, my own daughter was stealing my life's work with the help of someone pretending to be my dead husband. My name is Eleanor Montgomery. Everyone calls me Ella. And at 68 years old, I never thought I'd be fighting my own flesh and blood for what rightfully belongs to me. But that's exactly what happened last summer in Savannah, Georgia, when my daughter Grace tried to take everything I had built over a lifetime. It's not easy to share this story. The shame burns almost as much as the betrayal. But if telling you what happened to me helps even one other woman protect herself, then it's worth reliving this nightmare. I've lived in Savannah's historic district for over 4 decades. My late husband Arthur and I purchased a beautiful colonial building on Abercorn Street when we were just newlyweds with nothing but dreams and determination. The first floor became Arthur's Place, our Southern cuisine restaurant that eventually became famous for shrimp and grits that had tourists lining up around the block on Sunday mornings. The second floor was our family home where we raised our daughter Grace. Arthur passed away 7 years ago, massive heart attack while prepping for Sunday brunch. One moment he was laughing, telling me about the special blackberry cobbler he'd made, and the next, he was gone, just like that. 40 years of marriage ended in the blink of an eye. I kept the restaurant going for 2 years after his death, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. The joy had left the kitchen when Arthur did. So I finally leased the restaurant space to a young chef who respected our traditions but brought his own style. Between that income and the 2 other commercial properties Arthur and I had invested in over the years, a boutique on Broughton Street and an art gallery near Forsyth Park, I was comfortable. Not wealthy by any means, but secure in my golden years. Or so I thought. After Arthur died, Grace became more attentive. She'd visit more frequently with my 16-year-old grandson, Michael. At first, it seemed like we were finally growing closer after years of distance. She'd bring groceries, check my medication, insist on handling my finances because it's too stressful for you, Mom. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. The way she'd dismiss my questions about bank statements. How she'd rush me to sign papers without explaining them fully. Her sudden interest in the property's maintenance issues and insurance policies. But grief has a way of blinding you, and I was just so grateful not to be alone. Mom, you've worked so hard your whole life, Grace would say. It's time to let someone else handle the burden. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my only child, my flesh and blood. The little girl Arthur and I had sacrificed everything for. We'd worked 16-hour days so she could attend the best schools, postponed vacations so she could have piano lessons and summer camps, drained our savings for her college education. Everything we ever did was to give her a better life than we'd had. I never questioned her intentions until that Friday evening when she accidentally left her. It was a warm June evening when Grace came by with what she called routine paperwork that needed my signature. She seemed more fidgety than usual, checking her watch repeatedly, rushing me through dinner. Mom, I've been talking with an estate attorney, she said, sliding a manila folder across my kitchen table. These are just updates to your property records since Dad's been gone for over 7 years now. Legal formalities, really. I flipped through the pages, dense with legal terminology. Do I need to read all this tonight? Maybe I should have Richard look at it. Richard Owens had been Arthur's and my attorney for 30 years. Grace's face tightened. Richard retired last year, Mom. Don't you remember these papers are straightforward? The attorney already reviewed everything. It's just to make sure your properties are properly titled now that Dad is gone. She pushed a pen toward me. Just sign where the yellow tabs are. I need to get these back tomorrow. Something felt off, but I couldn't place what. Grace had been handling so many things for me lately that I'd grown accustomed to signing whatever she put in front of me. Still, something made me hesitate. I think I'll look these over properly in the morning, I said. My eyes are tired tonight. Grace's smile faltered. Mom, I drove all the way out here specifically to get these signed. The attorney's office closes early tomorrow and there's a deadline we can't miss. What kind of deadline? I asked. She sighed with the impatience I'd grown used to. Just property tax recording deadlines. Nothing to worry about, but important to meet. Please, Mom, trust me on this. Reluctantly, I took the pen, but my arthritis was flaring. Let me get my reading glasses first. I'll get them, Grace said, jumping up. While she went to my bedroom to fetch my glasses, her phone chimed with a text message. Then it chimed again, and again. Grace, your phone, I called out. I'll check it in a minute, she called back, still rummaging in my bedroom. That's when I noticed her iPad on the sofa where she'd been sitting earlier. It lit up with the same message notifications. I wouldn't normally look at someone else's private messages, but the name that appeared on the screen made my blood run cold. Arthur Montgomery. My husband. My dead husband. The iPad wasn't locked. Grace never was one for security features. With trembling hands, I picked it up. The messages were visible on the screen. Did she sign yet? We need to move quickly before she changes her mind. Another message followed. The buyers won't wait forever. This is our chance, Grace. A third. Remember, once she signs, we're set for life. No more money problems. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the device. My Arthur had been dead for 7 years. His phone had been disconnected. His accounts closed. Who was messaging my daughter pretending to be my husband? I heard Grace's footsteps returning and quickly set the iPad back down, my heart hammering in my chest. She handed me my glasses with that same too bright smile. Found them on your nightstand, she said. Now if you could just sign where the yellow tabs are. I put on my glasses, hands still shaking, and pretended to read the documents. My mind was racing. Who was pretending to be Arthur? What were these papers really for? What buyers were they talking about? Grace, honey, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I'm actually feeling quite tired suddenly. Would you mind terribly if I took these to read properly tomorrow? You could come back for them in the afternoon. Her smile froze. Mom, I just explained how important it is to get these signed tonight. I know, but I really don't feel comfortable signing something I haven't read carefully. Your father always taught me that. I deliberately mentioned Arthur, watching her reaction. A flash of something guilt-fear crossed her face before she regained control. Fine, she said tightly, but I need to come by first thing in the morning. These really can't wait. After she gathered her purse to leave, I pointed to the iPad. Don't forget that. Oh, she exclaimed, snatching it up quickly. Thanks. I need this for work tomorrow. After she left, I sat in my kitchen, the unsigned papers before me, my world tilting on its axis. I picked up the phone and called the one person I could always trust, Caroline Wilson, my best friend, since before Arthur and I had even opened the restaurant. Caroline, I said when she answered, my voice finally breaking. I need you to come over right now. Something terrible is happening. Caroline arrived 20 minutes later, her silver hair still in curlers, wearing a hastily thrown-on sweater over her nightgown. In her hand was a bottle of bourbon. Talk first or drink first? She asked, setting the bottle on my kitchen table. Both, I replied, already retrieving 2 glasses from the cabinet. My hands were still shaking. I told her everything, the strange behavior, the mysterious messages from Arthur, the urgent paperwork. As I spoke, I spread the documents across the table and we both began reading through them carefully. Oh my God, Caroline whispered after a few minutes. Ella, this isn't a property update. This is a deed transfer. You'd be signing over all 3 properties to Grace. Everything would be in her name only. The room seemed to spin. That can't be right. Why would she? Caroline pointed to a paragraph near the end of the document. Look at this. Once signed, you'd have no legal right to any of the properties or the income they generate. You'd be completely dependent on Grace's goodwill. I took a long swig of bourbon, feeling the burn down my throat. Who was she texting with? Arthur's been gone for 7 years. His phone number was disconnected. His accounts closed. I don't know, Caroline said grimly, but whoever it is, they're planning to sell your properties. That's clear from the messages you saw. I closed my eyes, trying to process the betrayal. My daughter, my only child, was attempting to steal everything Arthur and I had built over a lifetime of hard work. And someone was helping her, someone pretending to be my dead husband. What do I do? I whispered. Caroline squared her shoulders. First, we document everything. Tomorrow morning, first thing, we go see Richard Owens. Grace said he retired. That's news to me. I saw him at the farmer's market last weekend talking about a case he was working on, Caroline said. Let me make a call. While Caroline called Richard's home number, I flipped through the papers again, noticing details I'd missed before. There was a clause stating I would receive a monthly stipend of $1,500 for living expenses. My life's work reduced to an allowance from my daughter. Caroline hung up. Richard's in town. He'll meet us at his office at 9 a.m. sharp. He said don't sign anything. I won't, I promised. But Grace is coming back in the morning for these papers. Tell her your arthritis is acting up. Buy us some time, Caroline suggested. And Ella, don't let on that you suspect anything. If they're planning something this elaborate, we need to be careful. After Caroline left, I sat alone in my kitchen, the bourbon bottle temptingly close. But I needed a clear head. Instead of drinking more, I did something I hadn't done since Arthur died. I went to his desk in the study, unlocked the bottom drawer where he kept important papers, and began looking through our property deeds, insurance policies, and financial statements. Most of the recent statements were missing. Grace had insisted on handling everything electronically to save trees. But the original property deeds were there along with Arthur's journal, where he meticulously documented every major financial decision we ever made. As I read through his careful notes written in the handwriting, I missed so much tears streamed down my face. We had worked so hard for everything we had, saved every penny during those early years when the restaurant barely broke even, celebrated like we'd won the lottery when we finally paid off the mortgage, made careful investments in additional properties to ensure our retirement would be secure and to leave something meaningful for Grace. And now she wanted it all immediately without waiting for the inheritance that would naturally come to her someday. As dawn broke, I finally fell into an exhausted sleep at Arthur's desk, clutching his journal to my chest, more determined than ever to protect what we had built. Richard Owens hadn't changed much in the 30 years I'd known him, still the same bow tie, suspenders, and no-nonsense attitude that had made him Arthur's trusted advisor and friend. "I most certainly have not retired," he said indignantly when I told him what Grace had claimed. "I've reduced my caseload, but I still maintain select clients. Your family has always been among them." Caroline sat beside me in Richard's wood-paneled office as I explained everything that had happened. When I finished, Richard's normally impassive face registered genuine shock. "These documents," he said, flipping through the papers Grace had left, "are not standard property updates. This is a complete transfer of ownership with minimal protections for you. Had you signed these, you would have essentially disinherited yourself." "But who would help Grace do something like this?" I asked. "And how are they sending messages from Arthur's old number?" Richard frowned. "That's deeply troubling. Let me make a call." He stepped out of the office briefly and returned with a younger man in a crisp suit. "Ella, Caroline, this is David Miller. He's a private investigator I work with on certain sensitive matters." David shook our hands firmly. "Mr. Owens gave me a brief overview. I'm very sorry you're going through this, Mrs. Montgomery." "Please call me Ella." I was past the point of formalities. "Ella," he acknowledged with a nod. "First, about these messages appearing to come from your late husband. That's almost certainly what we call spoofing. There are apps that can make messages appear to come from any phone number, even disconnected ones." "But why use Arthur's identity? That seems unnecessarily cruel," Caroline interjected. "It's psychological manipulation," David explained. "If your daughter is involved in this scheme, she or whoever she's working with knows that invoking your husband's name would make you more likely to comply. It's despicable but effective. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow. Someone was not only trying to steal my property, but was desecrating Arthur's memory to do it." "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need evidence," David said. "We need to know exactly what's happening, who's involved, and what their plan is. Without that, it's just speculation." "Grace is expecting me to sign these papers today," I said. Richard and David exchanged looks. "We need to buy time," Richard said. "Tell Grace you've made an appointment with your doctor about your arthritis and can't sign until it improves. That should give us a few days." David nodded. "Meanwhile, I'll start investigating. I'll need access to your phone records, property documents, and any financial statements you can provide. And if possible, we need to see those messages from Arthur again." "Grace has her iPad with her," I said. "I don't know when I'll have another chance to see it." "What about your grandson, Michael?" Caroline suggested. "He might be able to help. Is he close with Grace?" I thought about my quiet, thoughtful grandson. Michael had always been more like Arthur, and me introspective, bookish, while Grace took after her father's side of the family, ambitious, sometimes ruthlessly so. "I don't want to put him in the middle of this," I said hesitantly. "We won't," David assured me. "But if he visits you regularly, he might notice something or have access to information that could help us understand what's happening." As we were discussing strategy, my phone rang. It was Grace. Richard gestured for me to answer and put it on speaker. "Hello, Grace," I said, trying to sound normal. "Mom, I'm on my way to pick up those papers," she said without preamble. "Are they signed?" "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." My arthritis is flaring up terribly this morning. I can barely hold a pen. I've made an appointment with Dr. Patel for later today. There was a pause. You need to sign these papers, Mom. Today. I understand they're important, but I physically cannot sign them right now. My hand is swollen and painful. This wasn't entirely a lie. My arthritis was indeed acting up, likely from stress. I can help you sign, she said, her voice hardening slightly. No, that wouldn't be legal, I responded, surprised by her suggestion. Let me see what the doctor says. Maybe he can give me something for the inflammation. Another pause. Fine, but call me immediately after your appointment. These papers cannot wait any longer. The deadline. What exactly is this deadline, Grace? I interrupted, emboldened by the supportive presence of the others in the room. You keep mentioning it, but you haven't explained what it is. It's complicated, Mom. Tax filing deadlines for property transfers. I'll explain everything later. Just focus on getting your hand better so you can sign. After I hung up, David looked thoughtful. There's no property tax deadline that would require immediate action like this. They're trying to rush you for another reason. Maybe they already have buyers lined up for the properties, Caroline suggested. That's exactly what I'm thinking, David agreed. I'll start by looking into recent inquiries about your properties, see if anyone's been making offers. Richard cleared his throat. In the meantime, I think we should secure your assets as best we can. I can file a temporary freeze on any property transfers associated with your name or social security number. It won't stop a determined fraudster completely, but it creates roadblocks. I nodded, feeling overwhelmed but grateful for their help. Do whatever you think is necessary. As we were wrapping up, David asked one more question. Does Grace have access to your accounts, banking, email, anything like that? My stomach sank. She has my banking information. She's been handling my bills for the past year, and she set up my email account, so she probably has that password too. We need to change all of that immediately, David said grimly, but we have to be careful not to tip her off that you're onto her. By the time I left Richard's office, we had a plan. Richard would secure my assets legally while David began his investigation. Caroline would help me document everything and serve as a witness to any future interactions with Grace. As for me, I had the hardest role of all, pretending everything was normal while my daughter potentially plotted to steal my life's work. I was just finishing dinner when Michael called that evening. Grandma, can I come stay with you this weekend? He asked, his voice sounding strained. Mom and Matt are fighting again, and I can't concentrate on my SAT prep with all the yelling. Matt. Matthew Sullivan. Grace's boyfriend of the past 8 months. I'd only met him twice, a technology teacher at Grace's school who always seemed too slick, too charming. Arthur would have seen through him immediately. Of course you can stay, sweetheart. You know your room is always ready for you. Michael arrived an hour later, backpack stuffed with books and his laptop. At 16, he was already taller than Arthur had been, but with the same gentle eyes. Thanks, Grandma, he said, hugging me tightly. It's crazy at home lately. I made him a sandwich while he set up his study materials at the kitchen table. What are Mom and Matt fighting about? I asked casually. Michael shrugged, but I could tell he was holding something back. Money, mostly. Matt keeps talking about investments and opportunities, but Mom says they need cash now, not promises. I set the sandwich in front of him. They seemed to be getting serious quickly. Yeah, Michael said, taking a bite. Matt practically lives at our house now. He's always on his computer or talking on the phone about some deal or another. I tried to sound nonchalant. What kind of deals? I don't know exactly. Property stuff, I think. He used to work in tech before he became a teacher. He's always talking about his connections in Silicon Valley. This was the first I'd heard of Matthew's background in technology. A former tech worker now teaching and potentially helping my daughter scheme to take my properties. The pieces were starting to fit together. Michael, I said carefully, have you noticed your mom using an iPad a lot lately? He looked up, surprised by the question. Yeah, Matt gave it to her for her birthday. She's always on it. Why? Oh, I was thinking of getting one myself. I lied. Do you know if she likes it? Michael snorted. She's obsessed with it, especially since Matt showed her how to use it for video calls. She talks to Dad on it sometimes. The sandwich I was making for myself slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, landing on the counter with a soft plop. She talks to your grandfather on the iPad. Michael's eyes widened as he realized what he'd said. I mean, not really Dad. I know he's gone. It's just, Matt made these videos where it looks like Grandpa is talking. He used some AI program. Mom watches them a lot. She says it helps her feel close to him. I gripped the counter to steady myself. What kind of videos? Michael looked uncomfortable now. I only saw one. It was weird, like Grandpa was sitting in his old office talking directly to Mom about taking care of you and the properties. Matt said he used old home videos and some AI voice thing to create it. My blood ran cold, and not just text messages, but videos, fake videos of my dead husband telling my daughter to take control of our properties. This was beyond cruel. It was monstrous. Grandma, are you okay? You look really pale. I forced a smile. Just tired, sweetheart. It's been a long day. Later that night, after Michael was asleep, I called David Miller and told him what I'd learned. It's called deepfake technology. He explained, his voice grim. Using AI to create realistic videos of people saying and doing things they never actually said or did. The technology has gotten frighteningly good in recent years. So this Matthew person created fake videos of my husband to manipulate my daughter. The very idea made me sick. Possibly, or your daughter could be fully complicit. We can't be sure yet. David paused. This Matthew Sullivan, I need to look into him more thoroughly. A technology background would certainly explain the sophistication of this scheme. The next morning, I made Michael's favorite blueberry pancakes, trying to act normal despite having barely slept. As we ate, I casually brought up Matthew again. How long has your mom been dating Matthew? I don't remember her mentioning him until recently. Michael thought for a moment. They met at a school technology workshop last fall, but they didn't start dating until January, I think. After Mom's credit cards got maxed out and she was freaking out about money. This was news to me. Your mom is having financial problems. Michael looked down at his plate, clearly uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't be talking about it. Mom would be mad. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Michael, you know you can tell me anything. I'd never do anything to hurt your mom. He sighed. She lost a bunch of money in some investment Matt convinced her to try. Something about cryptocurrency. Then she took out loans to cover it, and now the payments are killing her. That's why they fight so much. She blames him for the bad investment advice. The picture was becoming clearer. Grace was in financial trouble, likely manipulated by this Matthew person, and now they were targeting my properties as a solution to their problems. Has your mom ever mentioned anything about my properties, the restaurant building or the other ones? Michael hesitated again. She said something a while back about how you're getting older and can't manage them properly anymore. That you'd be happier in a retirement community where everything is taken care of. He looked up suddenly, his eyes worried. You're not moving to a retirement home, are you? I love visiting you here. No, sweetheart, I assured him. I have no plans to leave this house. It's my home. After Michael left to meet friends, I called Caroline, David, and Richard for an emergency meeting. We gathered in my living room where I relayed everything Michael had told me. So we have a financial motive, David said, making notes. Grace is in debt, possibly due to Matthew Sullivan's influence, and they see your properties as a way out. I've done some preliminary digging into Sullivan, Richard added. He worked for several tech startups in California before suddenly relocating to Savannah 2 years ago. There are some gaps in his employment history that concern me. Could he be using Grace to get to Ella's properties? Caroline wondered. Or they could be working together, David suggested. We can't rule anything out yet. I sat quietly, feeling a strange mix of heartbreak and determination. The daughter I had raised, the child Arthur and I had sacrificed so much for, was either being manipulated by a con man or had become one herself. Either way, I needed to protect what Arthur and I had built. What's our next step? I asked. We need hard evidence, David said, especially of these deepfake videos. Without proof, this remains speculation. Michael said Grace watches them on the iPad, I noted. David nodded thoughtfully. If we could get access to that iPad even briefly. I'm supposed to have dinner with Grace tomorrow night, I said. She's still waiting for me to sign those papers. Maybe there's a way. As we discussed possibilities, my phone rang. It was Grace. Mom, she said without greeting when I answered. I've been thinking. If your arthritis is really that bad, maybe I should just come over and help guide your hand to sign the papers. The doctor must have given you something for the pain by now. Her persistence was becoming alarming. Actually, Grace, I said, an idea forming, I was going to call you. The doctor suggested heat therapy might help. I was wondering if you and Michael could come for dinner tomorrow. I'll make Arthur's famous shrimp and grits. After a nice meal and some wine, maybe my hands will be steady enough to sign." There was a brief pause before Grace answered, her voice noticeably brighter. "That sounds perfect, Mom. How about 6:30? Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself and Michael," I said. "Oh, and if you'd like to bring Matthew, that would be fine too. It's time I got to know him better." Another pause, longer this time. "Matt has a faculty meeting tomorrow night. It'll just be Michael and me." After we hung up, I looked at the others. "She's coming tomorrow night and she's bringing the papers, but not Matthew apparently." David leaned forward. "This is good. It gives us a chance to get more information without Sullivan there. And maybe a chance to see what's on that iPad," Caroline added. Richard adjusted his bow tie a habit when he was thinking deeply. "We need to be careful. If Grace suspects you know anything, she might accelerate whatever plan they have." I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The initial shock and hurt were giving way to a steely resolve. Arthur and I had built our life from nothing, working 16-hour days, sacrificing vacations and luxuries to secure our future and Grace's inheritance. I would not let anyone, not even my own daughter, steal what we had earned. "I'll be careful," I promised, "but I will find out the truth." As my 3 allies prepared to leave, I remembered something else Michael had mentioned. David Michael said Grace and Matthew fight about money, specifically that she blames him for bad investment advice involving cryptocurrency. Could that help your investigation? David's eyes lit up. "Absolutely. Cryptocurrency transactions leave digital footprints. If I can trace their financial activities, it might lead us to other evidence." That night I sat in Arthur's old chair in our bedroom holding his photograph. "I won't let them take what we built," I whispered to his smiling face. "And I won't let them use your memory to do it." For the first time since discovering Grace's betrayal, I felt not just hurt and confused, but angry. A slow-burning, righteous anger that would fuel what I needed to do next. Arthur always said I was stronger than I knew. It was time to prove him right. I spent the next day preparing Arthur's famous shrimp and grits, following his recipe to the letter. The familiar routine of cooking, chopping onions and bell peppers, stirring the grits until they were perfectly creamy, sautéing the shrimp in butter and garlic, was therapeutic. For a few hours, I could almost forget why I was hosting this dinner. David Miller called mid-afternoon with updates. "I've been looking into Matthew Sullivan," he said. "There's definitely something off about his background. He left his last tech job under unclear circumstances, and there are some complaints from former colleagues about unethical behavior, though nothing that led to formal charges." "What kind of unethical behavior?" I asked, cradling the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued stirring the grits. "Mostly allegations about using company technology for personal projects. And get this, one of his specialties was voice synthesis and video manipulation." My spoon paused mid-stir. "The deepfakes." "Exactly. He has the exact skill set needed to create convincing fake videos of your husband." "What about Grace? Have you found anything about her financial situation?" David sighed. "Your daughter is in serious financial trouble, Ella. Multiple maxed-out credit cards, a second mortgage on her house, and several personal loans. All told, she's about $350,000 in debt." The number staggered me. How is that possible? She makes a good salary as a school administrator. The cryptocurrency losses Michael mentioned might explain part of it. I'm still tracing those transactions. But regardless of how it happened, she's underwater financially, which gives her a powerful motive to try to get control of your assets. I thanked David for the information and promised to update him after dinner. As I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just protecting my own interests anymore. I was potentially saving Grace from a predator like Matthew Sullivan, even if she didn't realize it yet. Caroline arrived at 5:30 to help set up. We had planned for her to coincidentally drop by during dinner, giving us an excuse to distract Grace while I checked her iPad if she brought it. "Are you nervous?" Caroline asked as we arranged flowers on the dining table. "Terrified," I admitted. "I've never had to pretend with Grace before. Even when she was a rebellious teenager, we were always honest with each other. Or at least I thought we were." Caroline squeezed my arm. "You can do this, Ella. Just remember what's at stake." Grace and Michael arrived precisely at 6:30. Grace carried her large purse, the one I knew she usually kept her iPad in, and a manila folder that I assumed contained the property transfer documents. "Something smells wonderful," she said, kissing my cheek. "Dad's shrimp and grits." I nodded, accepting her kiss while fighting the urge to recoil. with his secret ingredient and everything. Bacon fat in the grits, Michael said with a grin. Not so secret to me. Grandpa showed me how to make them before he died. Grace set her purse on the sideboard and the folder on the coffee table. Should we eat first or take care of business? She asked, gesturing toward the folder. Let's enjoy dinner while it's hot, I suggested. Business can wait until after dessert. Throughout the meal, I maintained what I hoped was convincing small talk, asking about Michael's school and Grace's work. Grace seemed relaxed, probably assuming that my invitation meant I was ready to sign her documents. As we were finishing the main course, Caroline's arrival provided the diversion we needed. I excused myself to let her in, and she immediately launched into a well-rehearsed story about car trouble. Grace, Michael, so lovely to see you both, she gushed. Ella, I'm so sorry to interrupt your dinner. My car just died right outside your house. The tow truck won't be here for at least an hour. You poor thing, I said. Come sit down. Have some dinner while you wait. As planned, Caroline engaged Grace and Michael in conversation, while I cleared plates, moving deliberately toward the sideboard where Grace's purse sat. With everyone's attention on Caroline's animated car trouble story, I managed to slip the iPad from Grace's purse into my apron pocket. I'll just get dessert started, I announced. Caroline, would you help me in the kitchen? Once in the kitchen, I quickly handed the iPad to Caroline, who slipped out the back door to her car where David was waiting. We had exactly 15 minutes, the time it would take to prepare and serve Arthur's blackberry cobbler, before Caroline would return with the iPad. I rejoined Grace and Michael, serving coffee and making small talk until Caroline returned, giving me a subtle nod to indicate success. When she handed me a borrowed pot holder, she whispered, Got it. Videos and messages. It's worse than we thought. My hands trembled slightly as I served the cobbler, but neither Grace nor Michael seemed to notice. As we ate dessert, Grace became increasingly impatient. Mom, about those papers, she finally said. How are your hands feeling? I flexed my fingers, pretending to assess them. Much better after cooking, actually. The heat therapy really does help. Why don't we look at those papers now? Grace practically jumped from her seat to retrieve the folder. As she spread the documents on the cleared dining table, Caroline engaged Michael in conversation about college plans, keeping him distracted. It's really very simple, Grace explained, pointing to the yellow tabs where signatures were needed. This transfers the properties into my name, but you'll receive a monthly stipend, and of course you can live in this house for as long as you want. I pretended to read through the papers carefully. And what exactly is the rush you mentioned a deadline? Grace shifted uncomfortably. Just standard recording deadlines. Nothing to worry about. I said, continuing to scan the documents. And these were prepared by a very reputable attorney, Grace said quickly. Matthew recommended him. I looked up. Matthew seems to have a lot of influence over your decisions lately. Grace's smile faltered slightly. He's just trying to help Mom. He knows I worry about you living alone in this big house, managing all these properties at your age. I see, I said, picking up a pen and holding it over the first signature line. And what exactly will happen after I sign? Nothing changes for you, Grace assured me. You'll just have fewer responsibilities. I'll handle all the property management bills, tenant issues, everything. I nodded slowly, pen still poised above the paper. And the restaurant lease, the current tenant has 4 years left on his contract. That won't change, Grace said, though something flickered in her eyes. Unless a better opportunity comes along, of course. Of course, I echoed, setting the pen down. You know I'm still a bit confused about some of these clauses. Would you mind if I had Richard Owens look these over first, for peace of mind? Grace's expression hardened. Richard retired, Mom. I told you that. And there's really no time for another attorney to review everything. These need to be filed immediately. Why? I pressed. What's the real deadline, Grace? What aren't you telling me? The tension in the room became palpable. Michael looked up from his conversation with Caroline, sensing the change in atmosphere. Is everything okay? He asked. Grace forced a smile. Everything's fine, honey. Grandma's just being a little difficult about some paperwork. It's not difficulty to want to understand what I'm signing, I said evenly, especially when it involves everything your father and I worked for our entire lives. Grace's facade cracked slightly. Mom, please, I need you to sign these. Tonight. Why? I asked again. Tell me the truth, Grace. Who are you selling the properties to? Her eyes widened. What I'm not, I don't... I saw the messages, Grace, I said quietly. On your iPad. Someone pretending to be your father talking about buyers who won't wait. The color drained from Grace's face. You went through my private messages. How dare you? How dare I? I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. How dare you use your father's memory to manipulate me into signing away everything we built? Michael stood up, looking confused and alarmed. Mom, Grandma, what's going on? Grace grabbed the documents, stuffing them back into the folder. Nothing, Michael, we're leaving. Now. Not until you tell me the truth, I insisted, standing as well. Who created those fake videos of your father, Matthew? Grace froze. What videos? The deepfakes, I said. The AI-generated videos of Arthur that Matthew created to manipulate you, or that you're using to manipulate me. Michael mentioned them. Grace whirled to face her son. You told her about that? Michael stepped back, looking between us. I mentioned that Matt made some videos that looked like Grandpa. I didn't know it was a secret. Grace's expression was a mix of fury and panic. It wasn't relevant. It was just a project Matt was working on. A project? I repeated incredulously. Creating fake videos of my dead husband to convince me to sign over my properties is just a project. You don't understand, Grace said, grabbing her purse. We need those properties, Mom. I'm drowning in debt. The bank is threatening foreclosure on my house. Matthew found buyers who will pay cash enough to clear all my debts and give us a fresh start. So you decided to steal from me rather than ask for help. The hurt in my voice was genuine. Would you have helped? Grace shot back. You and Dad were always so proud, so self-made. We worked for everything we have, Grace. Nothing was handed to us. Would you have handed me $350,000 to fix my mistakes? Before I could answer, Michael spoke up, his voice small. Mom, did you really try to trick Grandma into giving away her properties? Grace turned to him, softening slightly. It's complicated, honey. Adult problems. You wouldn't understand. I understand stealing, he said quietly. And lying. You taught me those were wrong. Grace's face hardened again. Let's go. Now. As they moved toward the door, I made one last attempt. Grace, please. We can figure this out together. Whatever trouble you're in, we can face it as a family. Just tell me the truth. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the daughter I knew, vulnerable, uncertain. But then her expression closed off completely. The truth, she said bitterly. The truth is that you and Dad always cared more about your precious restaurant and properties than about me. So now I'm taking what should have been mine anyway. With that, she stormed out, pulling a stunned Michael after her. The door slammed behind them, leaving Caroline and me standing in shocked silence. My God, Caroline finally said. What happens now? I sank into a chair, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation suddenly evaporating. I don't know, but I'm afraid it's going to get worse before it gets better. I had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grace's face twisted with resentment. You and Dad always cared more about your precious restaurant and properties than about me. The accusation echoed in my mind, cutting deeper than any knife could. Arthur and I had worked endless hours at the restaurant when Grace was young. We'd missed some school events, delegated some parent-teacher conferences to babysitters, but we'd done it all for her to build something meaningful to ensure she'd never struggle the way we had. At dawn, I gave up on sleep and made coffee. Caroline had stayed over sleeping in the guest room, unwilling to leave me alone after the confrontation. She joined me in the kitchen, her silver hair disheveled but her eyes alert. You look like hell, she said, pouring herself coffee. Thank you, always the flatterer. Did you sleep at all? I shook my head. How could I? My own daughter. The doorbell rang, interrupting my lament. Caroline and I exchanged wary glances. Are you expecting anyone? She whispered. No, Caroline peeked through the curtains. It's David Miller. I opened the door to find David looking even more exhausted than I felt, clutching a laptop. I'm sorry to come so early, he said, but you need to see this immediately. We settled in the living room where David opened his laptop and turned it toward me. We were able to access Grace's iPad yesterday. What we found was disturbing. He clicked play on a video file and suddenly Arthur appeared on the screen, my Arthur sitting in his old office at the restaurant looking directly at the camera. Hello, Grace. The Arthur in the video said, his voice so familiar it made my heart ache. I know it's been hard since I've been gone, but I need you to listen carefully now. Your mother is getting older and can't manage the properties anymore. It's time for you to take control for her own good. She won't understand, she's always been stubborn, but sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the people we love. The Arthur on screen continued giving specific instructions about the property transfers, even mentioning potential buyers. I couldn't breathe. The likeness was uncanny, the way he tilted his head, the small gestures of his hands, even the slight Georgia drawl that became more pronounced when he was being persuasive. "This is impossible," I whispered. "It's deepfake technology," David explained. "Sullivan is quite skilled. He used old videos of your husband, probably home movies Grace provided, and combined them with voice synthesis and facial manipulation software." "It's monstrous," Caroline said, her hand gripping mine. David nodded grimly. "There are several videos, all with similar messages. Some addressed to Grace, others designed to be shown to you, though apparently she never got that far in the plan." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Based on the text messages we recovered, they intended to show you these videos if you resisted signing the papers. A last resort to emotionally manipulate you. The thought made me physically ill, using Arthur's image to trick me into giving up everything we'd built. How could Grace be part of something so cruel?" David hesitated. "There's more. The messages suggest that while Grace was initially a willing participant, she's become increasingly uncomfortable. Sullivan appears to be pressuring her, even threatening her in some exchanges." "Threatening her how?" I asked sharply. David turned the laptop back to himself and scrolled through some files. There are messages where he alludes to making sure Michael knows what his mother really did, and references to those photos you wouldn't want getting out. Classic blackmail language. Caroline squeezed my hand. "So Grace might be a victim too." "To some extent," David conceded. "But she still initiated this scheme. The earliest messages show her approaching Sullivan with the idea of creating the fake videos, not the other way around." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Arthur had planted. "What's our next move?" "We have enough evidence to go to the police," David said. "What they've done constitutes attempted fraud and elder financial abuse at minimum." The word elder stung, but I ignored it. "If we go to the police, what happens to Grace? She could face serious charges. Given the amount of money involved, possibly even felony charges." I closed my eyes. Despite everything, the thought of my daughter in prison was unbearable. "What about Sullivan? He seems to be the mastermind behind the technical aspects." "We're still building the case against him," David explained. "There appears to be a pattern. I found 2 other recent cases in different states with similar elements, deepfake technology used to facilitate property fraud against older property owners. Different names were used, but the timeline fits Sullivan's movements." "So he's done this before," I said quietly. "He's a professional con man who targeted my daughter and then convinced her to target me." "That's our working theory," David confirmed. "If we can prove it, Sullivan would face the more serious charges, while Grace might be able to negotiate a plea as a cooperating witness." I turned back to face them. "And what about my properties in the meantime? Are they secure?" "Richard has filed temporary injunctions preventing any transfers," David assured me. "But we need to remain vigilant. People this determined often have backup plans." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang. It was Richard Owens. "Ella, he said without preamble. "Have you checked your email this morning?" "No, why?" "There's a message from Pioneer Development Group offering to purchase all 3 of your properties for a combined $2.3 million cash deal, closing within 7 days. My stomach dropped. "That's significantly below market value." "Precisely," Richard said. "And when I researched Pioneer Development Group, guess what I found? It was registered just 3 weeks ago. The listed CEO is one Matthew Sullivan." The pieces clicked into place. "So that's the plan. Get me to sign over the properties to Grace, who would then immediately sell them to Sullivan's shell company at below market value. They pocket the difference when Sullivan turns around and sells them at full value." "Exactly," Richard confirmed. "Classic real estate fraud scheme." After we hung up, I relayed the information to David and Caroline. "This is actually good news," David said. "It gives us concrete evidence of Sullivan's intentions and the financial structures he's using." "Should we respond to the offer?" I asked. David thought for a moment. "Yes, but carefully. We don't want to tip our hand that we're onto them. Richard should request more details about the offer standard due diligence. It might give us more information about Sullivan's operation. As David was preparing to leave with the evidence he'd gathered, my phone chimed with a text from Michael. "Grandma, can I come over? Need to talk. Alone." I showed the message to David and Caroline. "It could be a trap," Caroline warned. "Grace might be using him to get information." "Or," David countered, "he could be a valuable ally." He seemed genuinely shocked by his mother's behavior last night. I thought about my grandson, his gentle eyes so like Arthur's, his quiet integrity. "I'll meet him," I decided. "But at a public place, not here." I texted Michael back, suggesting we meet at Forsyth Park near the fountain where he used to feed ducks as a child. A public location, but with enough privacy for conversation. "I'm coming with you," Caroline insisted. "I'll keep my distance, but I'll be watching." An hour later, I sat on a bench facing the fountain, the spring sunshine warming my face despite the chill in my heart. I spotted Michael approaching, shoulders hunched, hands thrust deep in his pockets. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Grandma," he said, sitting beside me, his voice cracking slightly. "Michael," I said gently, "I'm glad you came." He stared at the fountain, struggling to find words. "Is it true what you said last night about Mom trying to take your properties?" I chose my words carefully. "Yes, it's true. I have evidence that your mother and Matthew were planning to transfer my properties and sell them immediately." "Why would she do that?" His young face was creased with confusion and hurt. "She's in financial trouble, Michael. Serious debt. I think she saw this as her only way out." He nodded slowly. "I knew about the debt. I've heard them fighting about it. Matt keeps saying he has a plan to fix everything, that soon they'll have enough money to pay it all off, and then some." He looked at me, eyes brimming with tears. "But I never thought they'd steal from you." I put my arm around his shoulders. "People do desperate things when they're frightened, and I think your mother is very frightened right now." "Last night after we left your house," he hesitated. "They had a huge fight. Matt was furious that Mom didn't get your signature. He said everything was falling apart because she couldn't handle one simple task." Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said if the deal falls through, he'll make sure she takes all the blame." "What deal exactly?" I pressed gently. "I don't know details, but Matt's been talking to someone he calls the investor, who's ready to move on all 3 properties as soon as they're in Mom's name." Michael looked at me directly. "Grandma, I think Matt is just using Mom. He doesn't care about her at all." "I think you're right," I said softly. "The question is, does your mother see that—" Michael shook his head miserably. "I don't think so. She keeps defending him, saying he's just stressed about money, that he'll be different once this financial pressure is off." "Michael," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something important. Those videos Matthew made, the fake ones of your grandfather, have you seen many of them?" "A few," he admitted. "Matt showed them to me, said it was a cool technology project, but they always felt wrong, creepy, like someone wearing Grandpa's face as a mask." "That's exactly what they are," I said. "And they were created to manipulate your mother and me." Michael swallowed hard. "What are you going to do? Are you going to call the police?" The question I'd been wrestling with all morning. "I don't know yet. I want to protect my assets, but I also want to protect your mother, even from herself. And I want to make sure Sullivan faces consequences for his actions." "I want to help," Michael said firmly. "Whatever you need. Mom's making a terrible mistake and someone needs to stop her." I studied my grandson's face, so young yet showing a maturity beyond his years. "It could get complicated, Michael. I don't want to put you in a difficult position with your mother." "She already put me in a difficult position," he said with sudden fierceness. "She lied to me. She tried to steal from you. That's not the mom who raised me." I nodded, making a decision. "All right, but we do this carefully. First, I need you to be my eyes and ears. Let me know what Grace and Matthew are planning, but don't put yourself at risk." "I can do that," he agreed. "Matt's been working on his laptop constantly, and he sometimes leaves it open when he goes to make coffee. I could try to see what he's doing." "No," I said firmly. "No snooping on his computer. That could be dangerous and possibly illegal. Just pay attention to conversations, plans, anything they discuss openly." Michael looked disappointed, but nodded. "Okay, what else?" "If you're comfortable, I'd like you to meet with my attorney and private investigator. They might have questions that could help build our case against Sullivan." "I'll do it," he said without hesitation. We talked a bit longer, finalizing our communication plan. Michael would text me under the guise of checking on my health, using a simple code to indicate if he had important information to share. As we stood to leave, Michael hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry, Grandma, about all of this. You have nothing to apologize for," I assured him. "Grandpa would be so mad about this," he said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. Yes, I agreed, thinking of Arthur's fierce protectiveness toward family. But he'd be very proud of you. Walking back to where Caroline waited in her car, I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and determination. My daughter had betrayed me, but my grandson stood by my side. One relationship fractured, another strengthened. "How did it go?" Caroline asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "We have another ally," I said, "and I think it's time to set a trap of our own." The next morning, Richard's office became our war room. Richard, David, Caroline, and I gathered around his conference table, surrounded by documents, financial records, and printouts of the evidence David had recovered from Grace's iPad. "Sullivan is getting desperate," David reported. Based on the text messages Michael forwarded from Grace's phone, the investor Sullivan promised the properties to is threatening to pull out if they don't close the deal by the end of the week. "Who is this investor?" I asked. "We're still trying to identify them," David said. "They're using layers of LLCs to hide their identity, but we know they've already put down a significant non-refundable deposit with Sullivan, which he stands to lose if he can't deliver the properties." Richard adjusted his bow tie. "That explains the urgency in Sullivan's pressure on Grace." "So Sullivan has a gun to his head, and he's putting one to Grace's," I summarized. "Precisely," David agreed. "And desperate people make mistakes." I looked at the evidence spread before us. "What's our plan?" Richard leaned forward. "I've been thinking about this. Sullivan's scheme relies on getting the properties transferred to Grace first, then to his shell company. But what if we appear to give him what he wants while actually setting up a legal trap?" "Go on," I encouraged. "We contact Grace, tell her you've reconsidered, that you're willing to sign the papers with some minor modifications. We draft our own documents that appear to transfer the properties but actually contain hidden poison pills legal clauses that would invalidate the transfer under certain conditions." David nodded appreciatively. "Creating the illusion of cooperation while actually building evidence of their intent. I like it." "Won't they have their own lawyer review the documents?" I asked. "Normally, yes," Richard acknowledged. "But they're rushing, they're desperate, and Sullivan has already shown he's willing to cut corners by creating a fake attorney identity. If we make the modifications subtle enough, they might miss them in their haste to close the deal." "And if they do spot the changes?" Caroline asked. "Then we have proof they were reviewing the documents carefully, not just helping an elderly mother update her property records as they claimed," Richard explained. "Either way, we strengthen our case." I considered the strategy. It was clever, but risky. "What about Michael? I don't want him caught in the middle when this all comes crashing down." "We'll make sure he's protected," David assured me. "In fact, his cooperation has been invaluable. The text messages he's forwarded have given us a clear picture of Sullivan's timeline and desperation." After discussing details for another hour, we finalized our plan. I would contact Grace, claiming that after reflection, I understood her financial predicament and wanted to help. I would offer to sign modified documents at a formal meeting with all parties present. "Remember," David cautioned as I prepared to make the call, "you need to sound sincere but not too eager. Just a concerned mother who wants to help her daughter out of a bad situation." I nodded, took a deep breath, and dialed Grace's number. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice guarded. "Mom, Grace, honey, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night." Silence on the other end. "I want you to know that I understand financial pressure. Your father and I faced our share of it when we were building the business." "What do you want, Mom?" Her voice was tense, suspicious. "I want to help you," I said simply. "Not the way you were planning, but I'm willing to work something out that addresses your needs without leaving me vulnerable." More silence then. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'll sign modified transfer documents, ones that provide you with financial relief while preserving some protections for me. We can meet tomorrow at Richard's office." "Richard Owens, I thought he was retired." The accusation in her voice was clear. "That's what you told me," I countered calmly. "But it wasn't true, was it? Richard has always been my attorney, and he'll need to be present for any property transfers." I could almost hear her calculating, weighing her options. Finally, she said, "I'll need to bring my own legal representation." "Of course," I agreed, knowing full well she meant Sullivan in his fake attorney persona. Shall we say tomorrow at 2 p.m.? After she reluctantly agreed and hung up, I looked at the others. She's bringing her attorney. Perfect, Richard said. When Sullivan shows up pretending to be a lawyer, we'll have him on record committing fraud. What if he doesn't come? Caroline worried. What if he sends a real attorney instead? Based on his pattern, that's unlikely, David said. He prefers to maintain direct control, and right now he's too desperate to trust anyone else with this. Richard began drafting the modified documents, immediately incorporating subtle legal traps that would both protect my interests and provide evidence of Sullivan and Grace's true intentions. Meanwhile, David continued his investigation into Sullivan's background. By late afternoon, he'd made a breakthrough. Matthew Sullivan isn't his real name, David announced, returning from a phone call. His real name is Mark Schiller. He's wanted in California and Arizona for similar fraud schemes targeting older property owners. He changes his identity every time he moves to a new area. So he's done this before, I said, feeling sick. Multiple times, David confirmed. Always the same pattern: identify a vulnerable property owner, preferably one with financial leverage over them, like a family member with debt problems, use technology to manipulate and rush the transfer, then quickly sell the properties to a pre-arranged buyer at below market value for quick cash. Do the police know about this? Caroline asked. I've contacted Detective Ramirez at the Savannah Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, David said. She's very interested in our case, especially given the interstate nature of Sullivan's, or rather Schiller's, activities. The FBI might eventually get involved, but local police can move faster for now. Will they arrest him at the meeting tomorrow? I asked. David shook his head. Not yet. Detective Ramirez wants to build a stronger case first. They'll have plainclothes officers observing, but they won't intervene unless there's immediate danger. As evening approached, I received a text from Michael, Mom and Matt arguing again. He keeps saying tomorrow is their last chance, and she needs to make sure you sign no matter what. Be careful, Grandma. I showed the message to the others. Sullivan is getting desperate, David observed. That makes him dangerous, but it also makes him more likely to make mistakes. I don't like the sound of no matter what, Caroline said worriedly. What if he tries something beyond legal manipulation? We'll take precautions, David assured her. I'll have my associates watching the meeting from different positions. Richard's office will be secure. That night, Caroline insisted on staying at my house again. As we sat on the porch with glasses of bourbon watching fireflies dance in the garden Arthur had planted, I felt a strange calm descend. Aren't you scared? Caroline asked. Tomorrow you're facing down people who've been plotting to steal everything you have. Oddly, no, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. I'm sad. I'm disappointed. But I'm not afraid. I took a sip of bourbon. Arthur always said the Montgomery women had steel in their spines. He was right about that, Caroline agreed, raising her glass in a toast. Besides, I added, what's the worst they can do? Take my property. I've already faced the worst loss, realizing my daughter was willing to betray me. Everything else is just details. Caroline squeezed my hand. You're going to get through this, Ella. And when it's over, you'll rebuild whatever that looks like. With Michael's help, I said, thinking of my grandson's steadfast support. At least I haven't lost him in all this. As we finished our drinks, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from an address I didn't recognize, msullivan.pdt@gmail.com. The message was brief. Mrs. Montgomery, I understand you've agreed to sign the transfer documents tomorrow. A wise decision. To ensure the meeting goes smoothly, I suggest you come alone. Bringing your friends or attorney will only complicate matters. Remember, this is a family affair. Matthew Sullivan, Pioneer Development Group. I showed Caroline the email. He's trying to isolate me. Classic predator tactic, she agreed. Are you going to respond? No, I decided. Let him think I've received it and am considering it. Tomorrow he'll find out I'm not as easily manipulated as he hoped. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself talking to Arthur's photograph, as I often did in difficult moments. Tomorrow's the day, my love, I told his smiling face. The day I fight for everything we built. I touched the glass over his face. I wish you were here, but in a way you are. You taught me how to stand my ground, how to fight for what's right. I could almost hear his reply in that warm Georgia drawl I missed so desperately. Show 'em what Montgomery women are made of, Ella girl. And I intended to do exactly that. Richard Owen's office was housed in a beautifully restored Victorian building on Bull Street, its interior all polished mahogany and leather-bound law books. For today's meeting, Richard had arranged the conference room strategically my back to the windows, so that Grace and Sullivan would have to face the light, making their expressions easier to read. David Miller sat beside me as my financial advisor, while Caroline waited in Richard's private office, monitoring a discreet recording system that had been installed with Detective Ramirez's approval. The detective herself was positioned in a coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the entrance. At precisely 2 p.m., Grace arrived looking tense but determined. Beside her was Sullivan, or Schiller, as we now knew him, dressed in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase, the very picture of legal respectability. "Mom," Grace said stiffly as they entered. "This is Matthew Sullivan, my attorney." I nodded coolly, not trusting myself to speak directly to the man who had been manipulating my family. Richard stood extending his hand. "Richard Owens, Mrs. Montgomery's attorney of over 30 years. The emphasis on the time frame was subtle but pointed. "And this is David Miller, Mrs. Montgomery's financial advisor." Sullivan hesitated before shaking their hands, his confident facade flickering briefly. "I was under the impression this would be a simple signing. I'm not sure all these additional parties are necessary." "When transferring properties worth over $2 million, I assure you they are," Richard replied smoothly. "Please have a seat." As they settled across from us, I studied Sullivan properly for the first time. Handsome in a generic way, perhaps mid-40s, with the practiced smile of a salesman. Nothing about him suggested the predator I knew him to be, which made him all the more dangerous. "Mrs. Montgomery," Sullivan began, his voice professionally modulated. "I understand you've reconsidered the property transfers we discussed. That's a wise decision that will benefit everyone involved." "I'm willing to help my daughter financially," I clarified. "But I need to understand exactly what I'm signing and how my interests will be protected." Sullivan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. These are simply updated property records that transfer ownership to Grace while ensuring you retain lifetime residency rights." Richard slid a folder across the table. "We've prepared modified documents that accomplish those goals while providing Mrs. Montgomery with appropriate protections. You'll find them quite straightforward." Sullivan opened the folder, scanning the documents with obvious impatience. Beside him, Grace sat silently, her eyes downcast, avoiding my gaze. "These are substantially different from what we prepared," Sullivan said, frowning. "They accomplish the same basic purpose," Richard countered. "They transfer ownership to Grace, but with conditions that protect my client's interests." Sullivan flipped through the pages more carefully now. "These conditions are unacceptable. For instance, this clause prevents the properties from being sold for at least 5 years without Mrs. Montgomery's explicit written consent." "A reasonable protection," David interjected. "Mrs. Montgomery is concerned about the stability of the properties and their current tenants." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "And this provision requiring all rental income to continue being deposited in Mrs. Montgomery's accounts, with only profits above operating expenses available to Grace, that defeats the purpose of the transfer." "Which is what exactly?" I asked innocently. "I thought the purpose was to update the property records after Arthur's death, not to immediately liquidate family assets that have been in our possession for decades." Sullivan and Grace exchanged glances. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the desperation in hers. "Mrs. Montgomery," Sullivan said, switching tactics, "I understand your concerns, but these modifications would make it impossible for Grace to address her current financial situation effectively." "And what situation is that?" I asked. Grace hasn't fully explained the urgency behind these transfers. Before Sullivan could intervene, Grace finally spoke. "I'm in debt, Mom. You know that already. I need to sell at least one of the properties to clear what I owe." "How much debt exactly?" I pressed. Grace swallowed. "About $350,000. And selling my properties is the only solution you could think of. You couldn't come to me directly and ask for help." Sullivan interrupted. "This is becoming unnecessarily emotional. We're here to execute legal documents, not have a family therapy session." "Actually," Richard said, "understanding the motivation behind these transfers is legally relevant, especially given the unusual circumstances." "What unusual circumstances?" Sullivan demanded. Richard's expression remained professionally neutral. "For instance, the fact that you, Mr. Sullivan, are not actually an attorney, but are presenting yourself as one which constitutes a felony in the state of Georgia." The room fell silent. Sullivan's face drained of color, then flushed with anger. That's a ridiculous accusation, he sputtered. I've been practicing law for 15 years. Under what name? David asked mildly. Matthew Sullivan or Mark Schiller? The shock on Grace's face was genuine. Matt, what are they talking about? Sullivan stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Grace, we're leaving. Not quite yet, Richard said, his voice hardening. Mrs. Montgomery has some questions for her daughter that deserve answers. For instance, perhaps Grace could explain the deepfake videos of Arthur Montgomery that were created to manipulate both her and her mother. Grace paled. How do you know about those? We've seen them, I said quietly. Videos of your father, my husband, saying things he would never say, encouraging you to take properties he worked his entire life to secure for both of us. It was Matt's idea, Grace whispered. He said it would help convince you. That's enough, Sullivan snapped. Don't say another word, Grace. But Grace seemed to be breaking free of his influence, looking at him with new clarity. You told me your name was Matthew Sullivan. Is that even true? Sullivan ignored her, gathering his papers hastily. This is all a misunderstanding that we can clear up later. For now, we need to leave. Before you sell my properties to your shell company Pioneer Development Group, I asked, or before your mysterious investor realizes you can't deliver what you promised. Sullivan froze. For the first time, I saw the calculation in his eyes give way to something darker, a cornered predator's desperation. You don't understand what you're dealing with, he said, his voice low. Some very powerful people are expecting those properties, people who don't take disappointment well. Are you threatening Mrs. Montgomery? David asked sharply. I'm stating facts, Sullivan replied. Grace's debt isn't just to banks. She owes people who collect debts differently. I've been trying to help her help both of you find a clean solution. Grace looked horrified. Matt, you said the debt consolidation was through your finance contacts. You never mentioned anything about dangerous people. Because you didn't need to know, he snapped. I was handling it. By stealing my properties, Isaz said. Properties worth far more than $350,000. What was your cut going to be, Mr. Sullivan? Or should I call you Mr. Schiller? Sullivan's hand moved to his jacket pocket. Richard tensed beside me, but Sullivan merely pulled out his phone. This has gone far enough, he said. I need to make a call. To whom? David asked. Your investor. Sullivan ignored him, stepping away from the table and dialing. He spoke in hushed tones, his back to us, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Grace turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears. Mom, I swear I didn't know about any of this. His fake name, these dangerous people he's talking about. He told me he had a simple solution to my debt problems. It started with the cryptocurrency investments, then the loans to cover those losses, and before I knew it, why didn't you come to me? I asked the question that had been burning inside me for days. I would have helped you. Because I was ashamed, she admitted. And because I resented you and Dad sometimes. The restaurant always came first. The properties, the business, they were always more important. We were building a future, your future, I said, feeling the old hurt resurface. Everything we did was for you. I know that now, she whispered. But Matt kept telling me I deserved the properties, now that I shouldn't have to wait for my inheritance, that you were being selfish, holding on to them when you didn't need them anymore. Sullivan returned to the table, his expression grim. We're leaving. Now. He grabbed Grace's arm roughly. This isn't over. Richard stood. Remove your hand from her arm, Mr. Schiller, or I'll have you arrested for assault right now. Sullivan hesitated, then released Grace. Fine. But understand this, you're making a serious mistake. All of you. He looked directly at me. Especially you, Mrs. Montgomery. Your daughter's debt doesn't disappear just because you've refused to help her. Actions have consequences. Yes, I agreed calmly. They certainly do. As Sullivan turned to leave, the conference room door opened to reveal Detective Ramirez, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Mark Schiller, she said. I'm Detective Ramirez with the Savannah Police Department. I need to ask you some questions regarding allegations of fraud impersonating an attorney in criminal conspiracy. Sullivan's face contorted with fury. This is harassment. I haven't done anything wrong. Then you won't mind answering some questions downtown, Detective Ramirez replied coolly. Your cooperation would be appreciated. I want my lawyer, Sullivan demanded. Ironic. David murmured, considering you've been pretending to be one. As the officers escorted Sullivan from the room, Detective Ramirez addressed Grace. Ms. Montgomery will need your statement as well. There are serious questions about your involvement in this scheme. Grace nodded numbly. I understand. I'll cooperate fully. After they departed Sullivan in handcuffs, Grace following voluntarily with another officer, the room fell silent. Caroline emerged from Richard's office, rushing to my side. Are you all right? She asked. That got intense. I'm fine, I assured her, though my hands trembled slightly. Better than fine. I feel unburdened somehow. David checked his phone. Detective Ramirez confirms they're executing a search warrant on Sullivan's apartment right now. Based on what they've already found in his briefcase, including documents relating to Pioneer Development Group and communications with the so-called investor, they expect to find substantial evidence. What about Grace? I asked. Will she be charged too? Richard's expression was grave. That depends on the extent of her involvement and her cooperation. The fact that she appears to have been manipulated by Sullivan works in her favor, but she still participated in a scheme to defraud you. She's my daughter, I said softly. Despite everything, I don't want to see her in prison. We'll do everything we can to help her, Richard promised. But there will be consequences, legal and otherwise. As we gathered our materials to leave, my phone rang. It was Michael. Grandma, the police just came to our house with Mom. They're searching Matt's things. What's happening? It's a long story, sweetheart, I said. But the short version is Matthew isn't who he claimed to be. He's a con man who is using your mother to get to my properties. Mom's crying, Michael said, his voice small. She keeps saying she's sorry that she didn't know. I believe her, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. About some of it anyway. Can you put her on the phone? After a moment, Grace's tearful voice came through. Mom, listen to me, Grace, I said firmly. Tell the police everything. Don't try to protect Sullivan. He was using you, and he would have abandoned you the moment he got what he wanted. I know that now, she sobbed. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never thought it would go this far. The fake videos, the lies. It all got out of control so quickly. We'll talk about everything later, I promised. For now, just cooperate with Detective Ramirez. She's on our side. After hanging up, I looked at the three people who had stood by me through this ordeal: Richard with his bow tie slightly askew from the tension of the confrontation, David reviewing his notes with professional thoroughness, Caroline holding my hand with the steadiness of decades of friendship. Thank you, I said simply, for believing me, for helping me fight. Arthur would be proud, Caroline said. You protected what you built together. We're not finished yet, David cautioned. Sullivan's investor is still out there, and based on his comments, they could be dangerous. Let the police handle that part, Richard advised. You've done your part, Ella. The rest is in their hands. As we left Richard's office, stepping into the warm Savannah afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in days. My properties were secure. Sullivan was in custody. Grace was beginning to see the truth. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet, but it was justice in progress. Arthur had always said that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing what was right, despite your fear. Today, I'd honored his memory not by clinging to possessions, but by standing up for the truth and dignity he had always valued. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time since discovering Grace's betrayal, I allowed myself to believe that eventually, somehow, my fractured family might heal. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of police statements, legal consultations, and emotional exhaustion. I barely slept, my mind constantly replaying Sullivan's thinly veiled threats about powerful people who were expecting my properties. Detective Ramirez called early Friday morning as I was making coffee. Mrs. Montgomery, we've made significant progress in the investigation, she said. Sullivan, or Schiller rather, has been formally charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, elder, financial abuse, identity theft, and impersonating an attorney. What about Grace? I asked, my stomach tightening. Your daughter has been extremely cooperative, Detective Ramirez said, her tone softening slightly. She's provided valuable information about Sullivan's operation and associates. The district attorney is still determining what charges she might face, but her cooperation will certainly be considered. I gripped the phone tighter. She was manipulated by Sullivan. She made terrible choices, but she's not a career criminal. I understand, Detective Ramirez assured me. But I need to be honest with you, the evidence shows she was an active participant in the early stages of this scheme before Sullivan began threatening her. The confirmation stung despite what I already knew. What happens now? Sullivan is being held without bail due to flight risk. We're working with authorities in California and Arizona where he has outstanding warrants. As for the investor Sullivan mentioned, we believe we've identified them. She paused, and I could sense she was choosing her words carefully. It appears to be a real estate development consortium with some questionable business practices. They've been buying up historic properties throughout the Southeast using various shell companies to avoid scrutiny. Are they dangerous? I asked bluntly. Not in the way Sullivan implied, Detective Ramirez assured me. They're aggressive business people who operate in legal gray areas, not violent criminals. Sullivan was likely exaggerating the threat to pressure you and your daughter. After promising to keep me updated, Detective Ramirez ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table feeling drained but somewhat relieved. The immediate danger appeared to be passing, but the emotional devastation remained. Caroline arrived mid-morning with pastries from my favorite bakery and a determined expression. "You look terrible," she announced, setting down a box of cinnamon rolls. "Thank you," I replied dryly. "You always know just what to say." "You need to eat, then shower, then change into something other than that bathrobe," she instructed. "Michael called. He wants to come stay with you for a few days. His father's picking him up this afternoon to bring him over." "Jeff is bringing him?" I asked, surprised. Grace's ex-husband had remained cordial but distant after their divorce 5 years ago. "Apparently he's been filled in on what happened," Caroline explained, pouring us both coffee. "He's furious with Grace, but concerned about Michael." As I nibbled on a cinnamon roll, my phone rang again. It was Richard. "Ella, I've just received some interesting information," he said without preamble. "The consortium that Sullivan was working with Hampton Development Partners has reached out to me directly." "Why would they contact you?" "Damage control," Richard explained. "They claim they were misled by Sullivan about the property's legal status. They've submitted a formal letter withdrawing any interest in your properties and disavowing any knowledge of Sullivan's fraudulent activities." "Do you believe them?" I asked skeptically. "Not entirely," Richard admitted. "But they're clearly concerned about legal exposure. They've even offered to provide evidence against Sullivan in exchange for not being named in any potential lawsuits." "They're running scared," I realized. "Exactly. Sullivan's a house of cards is collapsing rapidly." After Richard hung up, I brought Caroline up to speed. "So these big bad investors Sullivan was threatening you with are now begging not to be sued," Caroline laughed. "How the mighty have fallen." "It's almost anticlimactic," I admitted. "I expected more of a fight." "Be grateful it's ending this way," Caroline advised. "Clean and quick is better than messy and prolonged." Later that afternoon, Jeff arrived with Michael. My former son-in-law looked much the same as when I'd last seen him at Michael's birthday 6 months ago. Tall, trim, with salt and pepper hair, and the same serious expression that had attracted Grace initially and annoyed her eventually. "Ella," he said, embracing me awkwardly. "I'm so sorry about all this." "Thank you for bringing Michael," I said, "and for understanding." Jeff shook his head. "I always knew Grace had issues with money, but this—" He glanced at Michael, who was taking his backpack to his room. "Can we talk privately?" We stepped onto the back porch while Caroline helped Michael settle in. "I've spoken with Grace," Jeff said, his voice low. "She called me from her lawyer's office yesterday. She's facing potential felony charges, Ella." My heart sank. "I know. I'm doing everything I can to help her despite what she tried to do." Jeff ran a hand through his hair. "She asked if Michael could stay with me while all this gets sorted out, but I'm traveling for work next week. I hate to ask, given everything, but could he stay here? Grace doesn't want him to be alone at her house, especially with all the media attention this is getting." Media attention? I hadn't even considered that angle. "It's starting to leak out. Local school administrator involved in property fraud scheme. It's going to get uglier before it gets better." "Of course Michael can stay here," I assured him. "As long as needed." Jeff looked relieved. "Thank you. And Ella, for what it's worth, I believe Grace when she says she got in over her head. That Sullivan character sounds like a professional manipulator." "That doesn't excuse what she did," I said quietly. "No," Jeff agreed. "But it might help explain it." After Jeff left, Michael and I had dinner with Caroline. My grandson was subdued, picking at his food without enthusiasm. "What's going to happen to Mom?" he finally asked, looking up from his barely touched plate. I exchanged glances with Caroline. "She's in some legal trouble, Michael, but she's cooperating with the police, which will help her case." "Is she going to jail?" His voice cracked on the last word. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "I'm doing everything I can to prevent that. Your mother made serious mistakes, but she's not a hardened criminal." "She ruined everything," Michael said, his voice suddenly bitter. "Our family, her job, her reputation, all because she couldn't just ask for help like a normal person." "People do desperate things when they're frightened," I said, repeating what I'd told him earlier. "And pride can be a powerful obstacle to asking for help." Michael pushed his plate away. "Matt or Mark or whatever his name is, he told Mom that rich families take care of their own. That it was weird you hadn't just given her money when she needed it. He said it meant you didn't really love her." The manipulation was so obvious, yet so effective. Sullivan had identified Grace's old wounds, her resentment about the restaurant taking precedence, her belief that money equaled love, and exploited them masterfully. "Your mother and I have had a complicated relationship," I admitted, "but I have always loved her even when we didn't understand each other." Michael nodded, blinking back tears. "I know, Grandma. I told her she should just talk to you, but she wouldn't listen." Later that night, after Michael had gone to bed and Caroline had returned home, I sat in Arthur's old chair with his journal in my lap. Flipping through the pages, I found an entry from Grace's 15th birthday. Grace was angry again today because we couldn't close the restaurant for her party. Tried to explain that Saturday night is our busiest time, that the staff depend on those tips. She doesn't understand yet that sometimes love means working to provide, not just being present. Someday I hope she'll see that everything we built was always for her future, not just ours. Arthur had seen it even then, the disconnect between our expressions of love and Grace's understanding of it. We had shown love through sacrifice and hard work. She had wanted presence and attention. Both were valid, but the miscommunication had created wounds that festered for decades, wounds that Sullivan had expertly reopened and infected. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Montgomery," a woman's voice asked when I answered. "This is Amanda Wilcox, Grace's attorney. I apologize for calling so late, but Grace has asked me to reach out to you urgently." "Is she all right?" I asked, instantly concerned. "Physically, yes," Amanda replied. "But she's facing serious charges. The district attorney has offered a plea deal, but she needs to make a decision by Monday morning." "What kind of deal?" "Probation, community service, and full restitution in exchange for testimony against Sullivan and the Hampton Development Partners. No jail time, but she would have a felony record." "And the alternative?" "If she doesn't take the deal, the DA will pursue maximum charges, multiple felony counts that could result in up to 7 years in prison." My hand tightened on the phone. "She needs to take the deal." "She's reluctant," Amanda said carefully. "She's concerned about how a felony record will impact her future employment prospects. She's already lost her job at the school." "Better a felony record than 7 years in prison," I pointed out. "True, but there's another possibility she wanted me to discuss with you." Amanda paused. "If you, as the potential victim, were to formally request leniency and state that you don't wish to press charges against your daughter, the DA might be willing to reduce the charges to misdemeanors." So that was it. Grace wanted me to rescue her again. "Ms. Wilcox," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I love my daughter and I don't want to see her in prison, but I can't simply make this all disappear for her. There have to be consequences." "I understand," Amanda said, "but consider that a felony record will follow her forever, limiting her employment housing options, even her ability to rebuild financially." "I'll think about it," I promised, "but I need to speak with Grace directly before I make any decisions." After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of Arthur's study for a long time. Part of me wanted to rush to Grace's rescue to shield her from the consequences of her actions, as I had so many times before. Another part recognized that perhaps my constant protection had contributed to her poor judgment and sense of entitlement. Arthur would know what to do, I thought, but Arthur wasn't here. This decision was mine alone to make. The Chatham County Detention Center was a stark institutional building that seemed to drain the color from everything around it. I signed in at the visitor's desk, surrendered my purse and phone, and followed a guard through a series of heavy doors to a room lined with booths separated by plexiglass. Grace was already seated on the other side when I entered. She wore a beige jumpsuit that washed out her complexion, making her look pale and drawn. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, hung limply around her face. She seemed to have aged a decade in the week since our confrontation at Richard's office. We both reached for the phones simultaneously. "Mom," she said, her voice cracking. "Thank you for coming." "Of course I came," I replied. "You're my daughter." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. For everything. I never thought it would go this far. Matt Mark, he made it all sound so reasonable at first." "Your attorney called me," I said. She explained the plea deal. Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. 7 years, Mom. That's what I'm facing if I don't take it. Michael would be 23 by the time I got out. "Then take the deal," I said simply. "But a felony record is better than prison," I finished firmly. "Grace, there's no magic solution here. You participated in a scheme to defraud me. There have to be consequences." "I know," she whispered. "I just thought maybe you could talk to the DA, tell them you don't want to press charges against me." And there it was, the request I'd been expecting. Amanda mentioned that possibility. Hope flickered in Grace's eyes. "Would you—" "Please, Mom, I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm desperate." I studied my daughter through the plexiglass. The child I had raised, the woman who had tried to steal everything Arthur and I had built, now looking at me with pleading eyes. "I've been thinking about this constantly," I told her. "About what the right thing to do is for you, for Michael, for our family, and yes, for me too." Grace nodded, waiting. "I will speak to the DA, I said finally. "But not to make this all disappear. I'll ask that the charges be reduced to misdemeanors with conditions." "What kind of conditions?" Grace asked cautiously. "First, full restitution for any legal and investigative costs I've incurred. Second, mandatory financial counseling and therapy. Third, and most importantly, you will work at the restaurant, the one you were planning to sell out from under me, for at least 2 years. Grace blinked in surprise. "Work at the restaurant doing what?" "Everything. Starting from the bottom, just like your father and I did. You'll learn every aspect of the business that has supported our family for 40 years, the business you were so quick to dismiss as just an asset to be liquidated." "But I don't know anything about restaurants," Grace protested. "Exactly," I said. "You never bothered to learn about what we built, what we sacrificed for. Now you will." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "And if I agree to these conditions, then I'll speak to the DA about reducing the charges. But Grace, understand this, if you fail to meet these conditions, I won't intervene again. This is your one chance to make things right." She nodded slowly. "I understand." Then unexpectedly she gave a small, sad smile. "Dad would have come up with exactly this punishment, making me learn to appreciate what I tried to throw away." "Yes," I agreed. "He would have." "I'll do it, Mom," Grace said. "All of it. And not just to avoid jail. I need to understand. I need to make amends." After leaving the detention center, I went directly to the district attorney's office. Through Richard's connections, I had secured a brief meeting with Evelyn Carter, the assistant DA handling Grace's case. Ms. Carter was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She listened without interruption as I presented my proposal. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said when I finished, "while I appreciate your perspective as the victim, our office has an obligation to prosecute crimes according to their severity. What your daughter participated in was not a minor offense." "I understand that," I acknowledged. "And I'm not suggesting she escape consequences. I'm proposing alternative consequences that serve justice while allowing for rehabilitation." Ms. Carter leaned back in her chair. "Working in a restaurant hardly seems equivalent to the potential prison time she's facing." "It's not just about working in a restaurant," I explained. "It's about forcing her to confront what she tried to destroy, to understand its value, not just financially, but emotionally and historically. And combined with restitution counseling and a criminal record, albeit a misdemeanor one, it's a meaningful consequence." "Your daughter is an educated professional woman," Ms. Carter observed. "Starting over at the bottom of a restaurant hierarchy would be a significant humbling." "Exactly." Ms. Carter tapped her pen thoughtfully. "I'll discuss it with the DA. But to be clear, we would need these conditions formalized as part of a legally binding agreement, and any violation would result in the original charges being reinstated." "That's what I want," I confirmed. "No special treatment, just a chance for appropriate consequences, and genuine rehabilitation. 2 days later, the agreement was formalized. Grace was released from custody with a misdemeanor record, 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, and a legally binding commitment to work at the restaurant for a minimum of 2 years under my supervision. She would also make monthly restitution payments for the legal and investigative costs I had incurred. Meanwhile, Sullivan remained in custody, facing multiple felony charges across 3 states. The evidence recovered from his apartment and devices had revealed a pattern of similar schemes targeting property owners, particularly older women. The investment consortium that had spooked so easily turned out to be legitimate business people who, while ethically flexible, genuinely hadn't realized the extent of Sullivan's fraudulent methods. They continued to cooperate with authorities, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. Michael decided to stay with me through the end of the school year, needing space from the chaos at Grace's house and the media attention that occasionally still flared up around the case. Grace, unable to afford her mortgage payments without her administrator's salary, was forced to sell her house and move into a small apartment near the restaurant where she would begin working the following week. "Are you sure about this arrangement?" Caroline asked as we sat on my porch the evening before Grace's first day. Working closely with her after everything that happened, I sipped my bourbon, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. "No, I'm not sure at all, but it feels right. Arthur always believed in redemption through honest work. And if she doesn't change, if she resents you even more for this punishment, then at least I'll know I tried," I said, "that I gave her a chance to understand rather than just punishing her." The next morning, I arrived at the restaurant an hour before Grace was scheduled to appear. The current tenant, Chef James, had been surprisingly supportive when I explained the situation. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he'd said. "Besides, we're short-staffed anyway." Grace arrived exactly on time, dressed in the black pants and white shirt I'd specified, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked nervous, but determined. "I'm ready," she said simply. I handed her an apron. "You'll start with prep work in the kitchen. Chef James will show you what to do." For the first week, Grace worked silently and diligently, chopping vegetables, washing dishes, helping wherever needed without complaint. I watched from a distance, neither praising nor criticizing, giving her space to find her own rhythm. By the second week, something began to shift. I overheard her asking Chef James questions about recipes, about why certain techniques were used. She stayed late one evening to learn how to make Arthur's famous biscuits, her hands covered in flour, as she kneaded the dough over and over until she got it right. "She's a quick learner," Chef James told me, "and she's not afraid of hard work once she commits to it." On Friday evening after the dinner rush, I found Grace sitting alone at a back table nursing a cup of coffee, her feet propped up on an empty chair. She looked exhausted, but somehow lighter than she had in years. "May I join you?" I asked. She nodded, straightening up. "Of course." I sat across from her. "How was your first week?" "Harder than I expected," she admitted. "My feet are killing me, my back aches, and I smell like fryer oil no matter how many showers I take." She paused. "But there's something satisfying about it, too. Seeing immediate results. Making something people enjoy." "That's what your father always said," I told her. That the immediate gratification of feeding people was what he loved most about the restaurant. Grace traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. "I never understood why you and Dad spent so much time here. Why it mattered so much to you." "It was our dream," I said simply. "The first thing that was truly ours. We built it from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. And yes, we probably devoted more time to it than we should have, especially when you were young." "I resented that," Grace admitted. "The restaurant always seemed like the favorite child." I reached across the table and took her hand. "The restaurant was how we provided for you, how we ensured you would have opportunities we never had. But I understand why it didn't feel that way to you." Grace squeezed my hand. "I think I'm starting to get it now. Seeing how the staff works together, how proud everyone is of what they create here. It's not just a business, it's a community." "Yes," I agreed. "That's exactly what it is." As we sat in companionable silence, I realized this was the most honest conversation Grace and I had had in decades. Perhaps there was something to be said for meeting on neutral ground, both of us stripped of our usual defenses. "Mom," Grace said eventually, her voice hesitant, "do you think you'll ever be able to trust me again?" I considered the question carefully. Trust isn't binary, Grace. It's not all or nothing. Right now, I trust that you're genuinely remorseful and trying to make amends. The rest will take time. She nodded. That's fair. More than fair, considering what I did. One day at a time, I said, echoing Arthur's favorite phrase when faced with overwhelming challenges. That's all any of us can do. 6 months passed, then a year. The seasons changed, the restaurant thrived, and slowly, painfully, my relationship with Grace began to heal. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments of resentment from both sides. Old wounds reopened by careless words, days when the weight of betrayal felt too heavy to bear. But there were also breakthroughs, the first time Grace mastered one of Arthur's recipes and proudly served it to me. The afternoon we spent going through old photos and actually talking about the past. The Sunday when Michael, Grace, and I worked together in the garden, Arthur had planted 3 generations side by side. Sullivan's trial finally concluded with a 15-year sentence. Grace testified against him, facing her former manipulator with a courage that made me proud despite everything. The investment consortium paid a substantial settlement to avoid civil litigation money that went into a trust for Michael's college education. Grace thrived at the restaurant, surprising everyone, including herself. She moved from prep work to line cook, then to managing the front of house. Her administrative skills, once directed at education, proved valuable in streamlining the restaurant's operations. Chef James began to consult her on business decisions, and she developed a genuine passion for the culinary world. On the anniversary of the confrontation at Richard's office, Grace and I sat in my living room after dinner. Michael was upstairs studying, and we had the rare opportunity for a private conversation. I have something for you, I said, reaching for a folder on the side table. I've been thinking about this for a while. Grace took the folder with obvious trepidation. What is it? Open it and see. Inside was a legal document, a partnership agreement for the restaurant. Grace's eyes widened as she scanned the pages. Mom, are you making me a partner in the restaurant? A minority partner, I clarified. 25%. You've earned it this past year, and I think Arthur would approve. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she held the document. I don't know what to say. After everything I did. This isn't about erasing the past, I explained. It's about acknowledging the present and building for the future. You've shown real commitment to the restaurant, and more importantly, you've grown to understand its value beyond just dollars and cents. I have, Grace agreed. It's become home in a way, the place I feel most myself now. I smiled. That's exactly how your father and I felt about it. It was never just a business to us. I understand that now, Grace said, and I'm so sorry it took everything that happened for me to see it. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that change us most, I observed. Look at us now. I never would have imagined a year ago that we'd be sitting here as business partners. Grace laughed softly. Life takes strange turns. Indeed it does. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the partnership agreement between us representing not just a business arrangement, but a new chapter in our relationship. There's something I've been wanting to ask you, Grace said hesitantly. Something I've wondered since this all began. What's that? When you first discovered what I was trying to do when you found the messages on my iPad, why didn't you just confront me immediately? Why the elaborate investigation, the trap? I considered the question. Partly because I needed evidence, but mostly because I needed to understand why. Why my daughter would betray me so completely. I couldn't just react. I needed to comprehend. And do you understand why I mean? I think so, I said slowly. You felt overlooked growing up, like the restaurant always came first. That created resentment. Then, when you found yourself in financial trouble, that old resentment combined with desperation and Sullivan's manipulation to create the perfect storm. Grace nodded. That's surprisingly accurate. I kept telling myself I deserved the properties that you owed me for all those years of putting the business first. And now I realize how childish that was, she admitted. You and Dad worked incredibly hard to build something meaningful, something that has supported our family for generations. That's not something to resent, it's something to honor. I reached over and squeezed her hand. I think your father would be very proud of you right now. Really? Even after everything? Especially after everything, I assured her. Arthur always believed redemption was possible for anyone willing to put in the work, and you have definitely put in the work. The next morning I visited Arthur's grave as I did every Sunday. The cemetery was peaceful, birds singing in the ancient oak trees that provided dappled shade for the headstones. I placed fresh flowers beside the simple marble marker and sat on the small bench nearby. "She's finding her way, Arthur," I said as if he could hear me. "It wasn't the path we imagined for her, but she's finally connecting with what we built, understanding its value." The breeze rustled the oak leaves, a sound Arthur had always loved. "I think about what you would have done faced with her betrayal," I continued. "You probably would have been kinder than I was, less calculating, but you always said I was the strategic one." I smiled, remembering his fondness for calling me his chess player whenever I outmaneuvered a business competitor or difficult vendor. The restaurant is thriving. Michael is heading to college in the fall, Georgia Tech, for engineering, just like he always wanted. And Grace is becoming someone new, someone stronger and more authentic than she's ever been. As I sat in the quiet cemetery, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The betrayal had been devastating, but the recovery had brought unexpected gifts, a deeper relationship with my grandson, a genuine connection with my daughter, and a new appreciation for the legacy Arthur and I had built. Caroline had asked me once in the darkest days after discovering Grace's plan whether I thought I would ever feel whole again. At the time, I couldn't imagine it. The pain had been too raw, the betrayal too complete. But Arthur always said time was the great healer, and as usual, he was right. I wasn't the same person I had been before learning of Grace's deception. The experience had hardened me in some ways, made me more cautious, less naive. But it had also revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed: resilience, strategic thinking, and the capacity for a kind of justice tempered with compassion. "You would have handled it differently," I told Arthur's headstone. "But I think you would approve of where we've ended up." As I drove home from the cemetery, I passed the restaurant, its Sunday brunch crowd spilling onto the sidewalk. I spotted Grace at the host stand, efficiently managing the wait list, smiling genuinely at customers. She looked up as I passed, catching my eye, and raised her hand in a small wave. I waved back, feeling a surge of pride that surprised me with its intensity. Pride not in what I owned or had protected, but in the healing our family had managed to achieve against all odds. When I arrived home, Michael was in the kitchen making his grandfather's famous pancakes, the recipe he'd learned as a child, now executed with perfect precision. "Grandma," he called when I entered. Perfect timing. I made too many as usual. I hung my purse on the hook by the door, the same hook where I had first discovered Grace's deception via her forgotten iPad. That moment seemed like a lifetime ago now. "Those smell wonderful," I told Michael, joining him at the kitchen island. "Grandpa's recipe," he said with a grin. "Can't go wrong." As we ate breakfast together, Michael chatting excitedly about his upcoming college orientation, I felt Arthur's presence all around us in the pancakes made from his recipe in Michael's expressive hands that gestured just like his grandfather's in the home we had built together over 4 decades. The properties, the restaurant building, the boutique, the gallery, they were still mine. I had protected what Arthur and I had built. But I had also discovered something far more valuable than real estate: the capacity for redemption, for growth, for family bonds to bend without breaking. Grace would arrive later for Sunday dinner, a tradition we had reinstated in recent months. We would sit at the same table where I had confronted her about the property transfer documents. We would eat food prepared with recipes Arthur had perfected. We would talk, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with surprising ease, about the future. It wasn't perfect. The shadow of betrayal still lingered in quiet moments. Trust was still a work in progress. But it was real, and it was ours, this imperfect reconciliation built on hard truths and harder work. As Michael cleared the breakfast dishes, my phone chimed with a text from Grace. "Made Grandpa's blackberry cobbler for tonight. Hope that's okay." I smiled as I typed my reply. Perfect. He would be proud. And he would be, I thought. Proud not of buildings or businesses or bank accounts, but of this, a family fractured but healing, a legacy not just preserved but understood at last. In the end, what I had fought to protect wasn't just property. It was the truth of who we were as a family, the value of what we had built together, and the possibility of redemption even after the deepest betrayal. That was Arthur's true legacy, and now finally it was secure.